Hey everyone, my name is Chelsea. Welcome to Little Mountain Ranch. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm happy to have you here with me today. I just came up from the greenhouse. It is an absolutely gorgeous day and I was able to unplug my heaters and pull the plastic off my seedlings. I'll take you down to the greenhouse when we are finished making dinner and show you how everything's looking down there. I am so excited about this year's garden. I can hardly wait to start planting out in the actual garden itself. But for right now, let's get dinner made. We do have a busy day ahead of us, and as you know, I always like to make dinner in the morning. So we are going to make my daughter's very favorite dinner tonight. This is something that she would eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day if she could, and that is spaghetti and meatballs, and we're using the best ever spaghetti sauce recipe out of my cookbook. The digital edition of my cookbook is still currently available, but we don't have the hardcover available right now because we are working on a second edition of the cookbook with 20 new recipes that we're going to be adding to it. I'll also send out this recipe in next week's newsletter. So if you're on my newsletter list, you'll get the recipe, a printable version of the recipe there. And if you're not and you would like to be, you can click the link down in the show notes and get signed up for the newsletter. Before we get into making this sauce though, I want to try one of our pickled eggs. Do you remember when we made these pickled eggs together 3 weeks ago now? They look so delicious and so pretty, so I thought we could open these up and give one of these eggs a try. This was one of the recipes out of my one of my antique cookbooks. These smell very garlicky. There's a lot of garlic in these. This is so good. Oh, very vinegary though. Oh my goodness. I'll let my kids try these later on and we'll see what they think of them. Let me show you what we have going on in the kitchen this morning, and this is fairly typical for how a morning in the kitchen looks. So we've already had breakfast and the kitchen has already been cleaned up once, so I like to start the day out with a clean kitchen. This is a new batch of kombucha that I started this morning, and then I have 2 jugs over here that are doing their second fermentation with some fruit in them. And I do have a blog post on how to do all of this over on my blog, just so that way when I show it in passing like this, if you are interested in learning all the steps and you've missed the previous videos where I've shared it, you can go and get that information there. And then I have some squash, and these are out of storage and they're doing really well still. This is, I think it's called a Jarradale squash. This has been roasted up for our spaghetti sauce that we're going to be making there. And over here in my mixer, I have some sprouted wheat bread that is doing a rise, and I'm going to make that bread. And then over here in the sink, I have some pasteurized milk that I'm just cooling down to make some yogurt with, and then some ground beef for the meatballs in the sink over here. I got those squash all gutted and put into the oven this morning so that they would be cooled off enough so that I could use them right away as we put together this recipe. I have the seeds over here that are going to go out to my chickens. I am going to be doubling this recipe today. So the first thing that we're going to do is chop up a bunch of onions, and these are also onions out of storage. They are just doing fantastic. No signs of sprouting at all. This is the very last of my garlic, and there is a little tiny bit of green happening with that garlic, but these are actually the last cloves that I have of my garlic from last year. And I'm excited because when I went out yesterday, I saw that the garlic was actually starting to come up underneath the leaf mulch in my garden. So that's very exciting. I planted, I think, 10 different varieties of garlic last year. So normally with garlic, you plant it in the fall, usually in October, and then it just starts to develop a little bit of a root system the previous year, and then it actually develops the bulb in the following season. So I'm really excited to see all of those cool garlics that I grew, all the different varieties. We're just gonna get this garlic and these onions all dealt with. I love these little garlic peelers, they're so great. These Patterson onions that I grew last year for the first time stored so incredibly well. So I planted a bunch more of those for this coming up year. Okay, into our pot over here. And I always get asked about the brand for this pot, and I honestly don't know what it is. It doesn't have a brand marking on it anymore. I bought this many years ago from Winners, I think. And it is a fantastic pot. I just love that it's short and wide. So we're going to put in a good splash of olive oil into the bottom of our pot. And turn that on, and then we'll add our garlic and our onions into there to caramelize a little bit. I'm going to make a double batch. This single batch is a good size batch too. So if you were to make the single batch for this, you would probably, for most people, be able to freeze a lot of it, and it does freeze really well. So you could make a big batch and then freeze it into portion size amounts for your family. I forgot my onion goggles. There we go, that's better. So anyway, I am doing a double batch of this, but that is so that I have leftovers for tomorrow, because we have another busy day tomorrow, and this way I don't have to cook dinner, which I do try to do as much as possible, although honestly, my kids eat so darn much that we don't often have leftovers. Okay, so I'm just roughly chopping these onions. I'm not getting fancy about it. Going to put some freeze-dried celery in there. Freeze-dried herbs are just so fantastic. So that's a couple of teaspoons of dried oregano, a couple teaspoons of basil. Oh, it smells good already. A little bit of thyme. This recipe calls for peppers. I thought I had peppers in my fridge. I do not. I'm actually all out of the peppers that I put into the freezer and freeze-dried last year. I'm gonna do way, way more this year because I always run out early. But anyway, I'm out of peppers, so I just texted Dan because he's in town and asked if he could pick some up. So we'll also throw a couple of chopped peppers in here as well. All right, now we are going to add a couple quarts of tomatoes and a couple of quarts of tomato sauce. I'm happy though, because my canned tomatoes from last year are going to last me all the way into August when I start canning tomatoes again. I'm actually getting a hankering to start canning again. I always need a break in the winter. I did do a little bit of canning this winter, actually more than I usually do, but I always like to take a break before I get into canning again. But I love canning so much that I am looking forward to it. The first thing that I usually can every year is pickled asparagus and rhubarb, because those are the two first things that we get up actually in our garden. And I noticed the other day when I was walking through the forest garden that the rhubarb is just starting to come up. So that's really exciting. And now we're going to add a tin of tomato paste for every quart of sauce that we have. So somebody told me of this trick that I'm gonna try to do, and that's where you open up both ends of your tin of tomato paste and then you push it through with the lid. So if I understood the instructions correctly, this has been suggested to me more than once. So let's give it a try and see. So actually, it's not gonna work with this kind of can opener. This is the kind of can opener that cuts it around the edge instead of the very top, and this does not fit in there. So that idea is not going to work for me with that can opener. However, kind of makes it easier to take it out and get every last bit out. I think I'm actually just gonna add 2 tins of tomato paste. Oh my goodness. I just got tomato paste all over myself. 1 second. So like I was saying, I'm just going to add the 2 tins. Oh my goodness. I'm having quite the day, aren't I? Friends, it would be so easy for me to edit out these things. And I have to admit, sometimes I'm tempted to, but this is real life. I'm a real person. This is kind of a TV show, but also not a TV show. So I just try to keep it real. around here as much as I can. Okay, so I think instead of adding the 4 tins of tomato paste to my sauce, I'm actually just gonna add the 2 because this is looking nice and thick as it is. Let me show you. So nice and thick. So now this is the secret ingredient for this sauce. And you saw me in the tomato soup that I shared with you the other day that I also added squash to that. It adds such a nice creaminess to the soup and more flavor, definitely more nutrition. This is a new variety of squash that I hadn't grown before, and it's not kind of a full out spaghetti squash, but it's kind of a little bit like a spaghetti squash. And you can definitely use that kind of spaghetti or squash to add to your soup. I usually like to add a meatier one like a buttercup or a butternut squash to this. But because I had this big giant squash that was just still looking fantastic down in storage, I decided I would use some of this up. I won't use all of it. The rest of it I'll probably just put into some muffins or something like that. I'm so happy with how my squash is holding up actually. We put them in wooden crates this year, which really seemed to help with the storageability, and then kept them in the canning pantry rather than in the cold room. And they held up much better in there. I like to add a little splash of balsamic vinegar sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes to my sauce. Felt like it today. A tablespoon of sugar, just to cut the acidity a little bit of black pepper, but not too much, just a little. So normally, if I was going to be making this sauce and I didn't want to make the meatballs, I would have fried up the meat in with the onions and the garlic and all of that and browned it really well, and then added all my sauce and had the meat right into it. But since I'm going to make meatballs, I'm just going to make the sauce, and then we'll just add the meatballs to it after we're done the meatballs, which we are going to make up shortly. I think I'm gonna add a little bit more of that squash into there. So there we go. I think that looks good for the amount of squash. I'm also going to add a little bit of my freeze-dried kale because I have lots of it and I need to get it used up. Look at how beautiful and green and bright that still is. So I'm just going to add, I don't know, a couple tablespoons or so. Nice way to get in some greens into here. You won't even be able to taste it. Like most of our recipes, they are very much designed to adjust them to the taste preferences of your family. And it isn't often that I make it the exact same way twice. So the recipes that I share with you are kind of the base recipe, and then you can play around with it and adjust it to what works for you guys. So sometimes I'll also add red pepper flakes to this to just give it a little bit of spice, but I am not going to do that today. I do recommend the red and green peppers though. That really does add lovely flavor to it. So now we're going to let this cook for a couple of hours, just nice and slow and low on the stove here. And we'll add the peppers to it when Dan gets back. So I'm just gonna kind of push this mess to the side. We'll clean that up after. Grab my big bowl and put all my ground beef that I have in the sink into my bowl here. So we're going to add a couple of eggs to this, and this is just to help the meat stick together a little. Because we have this really rich in flavor and all kinds of good stuff sauce, we're gonna keep these really simple. Just some salt and some pepper, some garlic powder, and you could most certainly use fresh garlic for this. I'm also going to add some onion powder, and you could also use finely minced onion. But again, we're going for simple today. And that's it. Like I said, simple, simple. So we just have our oven preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're gonna mush this all up, which is of course everybody's least favorite thing. You could also add some cracker crumbs to this or some oatmeal if you'd like. This is super duper duper lean beef. Now we're just gonna make meatballs. I like to make mine kind of the size of a walnut. And we're going to bake these in the oven rather than fry them on the stove. Just makes less smoke, just needs less attention. You just pop them in there and let them do their thing. So this is a very lean, you can see, very lean beef. So I'm not having to worry about an excess amount of fat. But if you do have quite fatty ground beef, then use something with higher sides than a cookie sheet, just so that you don't end up with it going up over the sides and causing a grease fire in your oven. Okay, I popped those meatballs. I ended up with 3 trays of them in the oven. They've been cooking at 350. And they just have a couple of minutes left. But in the meantime, let's deal with this bread. It is risen up above the top. So like I said, this is a sprouted whole wheat bread. Very basic recipe. This just has a quart of warm water, a tablespoon of yeast, a 1/4 cup of honey, a 1/4 cup of olive oil, 2 teaspoons of salt, and enough flour to make a relatively soft dough. And then I let this rise for an hour, punch it down, let it rise for an hour again, make the loaves, which I'm going to do right now, and then let it rise again. And I find that works really well for whole wheat flours. So I'm just olive oiling my pans here. We're gonna let this rise again. So I'm just going to set these in a bowl here. Dan just messaged from town and he is just leaving. So it will be a little bit before I can add the peppers into the spaghetti sauce. But that's pretty easy to just chop those up and throw those in. So now dinner is pretty much ready. Our meatballs are all ready. Sauce is pretty much ready. What we'll do while the bread is rising is head down to the greenhouse and I'll show you what's happening down there. And then a little bit later on, I'll show you the finished spaghetti and meatballs. The minute I come down into my greenhouse, I just feel immediately at peace and calm. It just smells so good, looks so good. It makes me incredibly happy. So I still have more tomatoes yet to pot up and probably another 4 trays, which would be 200 seedlings, I think, left in the grow room that I need to get potted up and brought out here. But look at this cutie pie. It's just about ready to fully open up. Little snapdragon. Love it. I don't know if I shared this with you last time, but this one, I think it's the only one that actually decided it was going to develop a bloom on it. And I decided to let it bloom. Normally, because we're still weeks away before we can put these outside, I would be popping these off, but I just wanted one cheerful little bloom in my greenhouse. Look at how much better our tomato seedlings are looking. Don't they look great? So they're starting to get some nice deep green color. So it's starting to look much better. Lots of trays of seedlings coming up. Broccoli and cauliflower over there. Bunch of little cabbages over here. This is status here. Lavender lace over there. And then these ones, what were these ones? These ones are lettuces. And pak choi over there. Some spinach in here that has not come up yet. That one is old seed. So these cabbages, I love these cabbages. These are Copenhagen Market. So beautiful. I have managed to get most of these little guys put into their pots, and I do have an article that will be coming out on Friday, I guess the same day this video comes out, on making these paper pots. So actual step-by-step instructions on how to make them, because I know every time I come into the greenhouse, for those that have missed where I've talked about making these paper pots, they always come up. And so I did put together something so that you can learn how to make them. They're the easiest thing in the world to make, and I just absolutely love them. And the plants do really well in them as well. I wonder if it's because they are not plastic, so there's more oxygen flow kind of in and around the roots. But I don't know. Either way, I love them. So I'm just going to top off these guys with a little soil. And then we're gonna go up to the house, and I have some leftover pulled pork from last night. So I canned a whole bunch of pulled pork, which has been absolutely fantastic. We use it all the time. I just have to open up a jar, add some barbecue sauce, make some buns, and we have pulled pork. So we had that for dinner last night. So that'll be leftovers for lunch today. And then we'll have those meatballs and spaghetti and delicious sauce for dinner tonight. Little water. Our hoses are still freezing at night, so I have to bucket my water in here. So that is the last of the tomatoes now. So that's great. Those are all done. Now I need to get on to the peppers. I do have some of the peppers potted up, but I have tons more to do. But let's head back inside now. Okay, Dan is back. We have 2 red peppers and 2 green peppers chopped up that I'm gonna add into our sauce. Give this a mix. And we're actually all heading outside here shortly, so I am not going to bother turning this back on to cook those peppers until just before we eat, because they don't take long to soften up. And we're gonna throw our meatballs right in to our sauce and stir those right in. You could definitely just leave this as a vegetable marinara type sauce if you didn't want to add the meat to it, or add the ground beef at the beginning like I mentioned before, or like we're doing, having the meatballs right in there. I'll heat that up when we come in a little bit later and serve that with some spaghetti. And our bread is all done, so I'm going to cut into it. Oh, that looks perfect. Look at that. It smells so good. I went through a white bread phase for the last month or so, and now all I want to eat is whole wheat breads now. Before I leave you, let's try one of these meatballs with the sauce and see how it tastes. Looks pretty good. That's delicious. It's so good. This sauce has such a bright, that's the best way I can describe it, a bright and light flavor with all of those veggies in them. And then with those meatballs, it is just so, so good. I hope that you enjoyed today's video, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.